Alright, I know that The Sims 4 Let's Play won the vote. However, I decided it would be important for me to get out to make just one last video as we come to the end of Autism Acceptance Month. So, I'm going to bring you the long-awaited, more or less, uh, part of my series, What Musicals Mean to Me. Now, last year I came out with two, three if you count the two-parter for Hadestown. I came out with one about Hadestown, talking about what that musical meant to me as a neurodivergent individual, and then I came out with then I came out with six, talking about what it meant to me as a woman. And now I am going to bring you Wicked to kind of talk about both what it means to me as an autistic individual and what it means to me as a woman. That is why I am wearing my favorite Wicked hoodie with some quotes from the show. I got that for my birthday from, I believe, Redbubble one year. And I also have my pink Galinda scrunchie. That is Galinda with a ga, at least until later in the first act, but that's another story. And I also have my Elphaba and Galinda inspired nails that are kind of chipping at the moment because it's been forever since I've been able to it's been forever since I've had a manicure. Okay, by forever I mean like a few weeks, but it's been a crazy month. But again, that's a story for another time. So, without any further delay, let's start at the very beginning, which is exactly how did I get interested in this musical in the first place? Well, it actually starts in about 2015 or 2016. I don't remember for sure. All I know is it was my senior year of high school. And yeah, I know I'm super, super late to the game, but that's because Wicked came out in 2003, and I was like 5 years old then. So obviously, I was not in the target demographic. I mean, I liked The Wizard of Oz when I was little, but Wicked is on a different level than The Wizard of Oz. Not in a bad way. It's just something that's obviously a lot more complex and definitely something that would appeal more to older kids rather than really young kids. But anyways, so I actually got into it in my senior year of high school because I was waiting for class one day and I was like, you know what? I remember my freshman year, I was in my music class and I heard some girls singing Defying Gravity. So I might as well listen to what it actually sounds like on the original cast recording. So I pulled it up on my phone and I was hooked the moment I listened to that song. From Steven Schwartz's bombastic music to the, for lack of a better word, the empowering lyrics of, too long I've been afraid of losing love, I guess I lost. Well, if that's love, it comes at much too high a cost. And I'm through with playing by the rules of someone else's game. And I feel like that really describes me because I recently did a strengths test to determine what my top 5 strengths were, and one of them is believer, which means that I'm very steadfast in my beliefs, and I tend to feel more uncomfortable in situations where my beliefs are challenged. So I'm not just one to blindly follow the grain. I have my own ideas, and I like to stick to them, and I hear that that's really common in a lot of autistic people, where we tend to go against the grain. It's kind of a complicated thing, where on one hand, we kind of like the safety and the structure that rules bring us, but at the same time, some rules don't make sense for us, and therefore we're more inclined to challenge them or even break or bend them completely because they don't make sense to us and we don't understand why we should follow rules that are so arbitrary. And thus sometimes we can be labeled as defiant or rude or troublemakers when really it's more of that social blindness that we have. Like, you can't just tell us a rule and expect us to follow it because you said so. We need an actual legitimate reason to follow the rule if you're going to give it to us. But anyways, that's kind of getting off topic. So I started listening to more and more of the songs, and I'd say the point where I officially got hooked was the song No Good Deed. I was on my way back from a field trip to St. Louis, I think, because we went to the Glore Psychiatric Museum for my psychology class. So I pulled up that song, and it blew me away. It absolutely blew me away. Like, just listening to it, that music, oh, the music, that opening melody, it sent a shiver down my spine, and it stuck with me for days. And just hearing the amount of desperation and distress and total despair in Idina Menzel's voice, I was just, wow. Like, it didn't feel like she was playing Elphaba or singing as Elphaba. It felt like she was Elphaba. And that was the moment I really knew that this was going to be among one of my favorite musicals. But of course, it only got better the more and more that I looked into it, because I started to learn more about the plot, and specifically more about Elphaba herself, this misunderstood witch who's been labeled, this misunderstood girl who's been labeled a wicked witch for having the audacity to stick to her beliefs and not just blindly follow the crowd to save her own reputation or to get what she'd initially wanted, because she ultimately realized that someone that she'd looked up to and admired is actually a really bad person, and she's not willing to associate herself with a bad person solely for the sake of looking good or for the sake of getting what she'd initially wanted. I mean, that's kind of how it is later in the musical, but in the beginning, it's more so because she's a bit of a loner and a bit of an outcast, and, well, of course, because she has green skin. And honestly, the more and more I got into the musical, the more I saw myself in Elphaba's character, because I'd seen a few musicals here and there where I was like, oh yeah, I kind of like that person, or yeah, I see a bit of myself in him, or yeah, yeah, she does kind of remind me of myself. But when I saw Elphaba, I totally found myself saying, that's me. I've been there. I have been there 110%. Like, I hear you. I know what that's like. Because though I've never really been judged for my appearance, I've more so been judged for being kind of a weirdo, and for what other people saw me as an annoying piece of crap. Okay, maybe not an annoying piece of crap, but they saw me as annoying because I definitely kind of lacked in my social skills when I was younger. I had trouble reading people and reading the room and reading situations. And I was a little overly friendly when I was a child, which again made some people uncomfortable and kind of annoyed them, because sometimes I came on a little too strong, as I may have discussed in my Hadestown video. But kind of as I got older, I became a little bit more of a loner, where I decided, well, if I can't talk about the things that I like without people getting annoyed with me or without people getting bored, then what am I supposed to talk about? Because something else that I've learned is a lot of autistic people absolutely despise small talk for reasons that, yeah, I can totally understand. We totally despise small talk because it doesn't feel natural, because it's boring, and, you know, because it doesn't feel natural and because it's boring, then it kind of feels forced, and oftentimes we end up appearing even more awkward when we try to go along with the crowd. And even in the times where we can appear quote-unquote normal, it doesn't feel good. It feels so exhausting, and it feels like we're lying to ourselves and the other person. And it's sort of that ever-present social contradiction that we get, where people tell us, be honest, be yourself, be who you are. And yet when we are honest and when we are our natural selves, we get called out for it. Again, we get called weird, we get called rude, we're called annoying, we're called impolite, intrusive, lazy. We're called all sorts of nasty things, and I'm like, what do you want from us? You said be yourself. I am myself, and yet now you don't want me to be myself. And I think it's because when people tell you to be yourself, one, it's really become more of a buzzword than anything that's meant to be super meaningful. And two, one, it's meant to be more of a buzzword. Two, it's so people can look good, so that they can look progressive, so that they can look like they actually care about marginalized groups, especially people who are neurodivergent or people with quote unquote invisible disabilities who don't appear to have anything blatantly wrong with them. But when we kind of reveal our true selves, then there's also the fact that they kind of expect us to just be charmingly quirky, or they expect our true selves to be productive or bring something positive in some way. And yet, when we say something that they don't like, even if we're being honest, like if we tell them that we're not having a good day, or we're not a huge fan of the present that we're not a huge fan of what they gave us, or that we're uncomfortable with a certain situation, then they get offended by it, even though we don't mean anything by them personally. We just mean we don't like the outcome of the situation, and yet people tend to take it personally. And instead of thinking twice about maybe we didn't mean it like that, or instead of realizing and accepting the fact that we're not on board with something, they get defensive and blame us for it. I think because they also understand that we're easy targets, because they know that there is a lot that we miss and there's a lot that we don't understand. So instead of trying to improve themselves, they decide to tell us that we're the ones who need to improve, because they think it's easier that way, and it saves them the trouble of having to make accommodations and adjustments for us. But I'm getting off topic, as I just so happen to do. So, getting back to the topic of Elphaba, as I said, I was more so judged for the things that I did and the way that I acted rather than the way that I looked. But then again, Elphaba has too, because even though her green skin is the most apparent thing, given that that's literally how the musical opens, with her being born and everyone making such a big fuss out of the fact that she's green, people also have a tendency to dislike her because she's a bit of a loner, and because she's kind of your what people would classify as a nerd. She's kind of a brainiac, very studious student, very interested in her studies. She's a bit of what the other students would call a teacher's pet. She is very invested in her studies and isn't quite as interested in parties or any other social activities outside of classes like all the other kids. And, then there's also the fact that she is a little bit moody, not exactly like the bubbly and outgoing Glinda type. She's a lot more introverted, kind of likes to keep to herself a lot more. And that is also kind of something that I relate to, mostly because of my previous negative experiences with a lot of other kids. And then there's also the fact that, like I said, a lot of what I'm interested in is stuff that other people don't really understand or are not interested in. So that's why, even though in my older years no one has been outright cruel to me, at least nobody my age, it's still really hard for me to find people that I fit in with and that I relate to. And it's hard to find people to really be my friends. So for the longest time, I've had no friends to speak of, and I think that's partially because, and it sort of led to that conflict where I feel like I don't fit in with neurotypical people because I'm too neurodiverse, but I don't necessarily fit in with neurodiverse people because I've developed so many masking behaviors, and also because of a lot of my therapies when I was younger. not all of which has necessarily been positive experiences. I've kind of, and I don't say this to brag in any way, I'm a little more advanced than some other people my age, so sometimes it's led to me feeling more like a babysitter or a parent figure rather than an actual friend. And then there's the fact that sometimes I see things that other people don't see, and I'm interested in things that other people aren't interested in. Like, I remember when I was in junior high, so many of the girls were interested in stuff like Twilight, and I just didn't see the point of that. And then there's another girl around my age. She's very sweet and she's a good person, but I just feel like I've kind of outgrown her, and part of that is because of the fact that she likes movies like Twilight and Amazon Cinderella, and I can just see right through them. Because, again, I can see Amazon Cinderella, claim to want to try and put a new twist on the Cinderella story when really it was more just trying to pander to the kids of today to try and be cool and hip and progressive, when really it's like, no, you weren't trying to do any of that. You were just trying to look cool. You didn't actually believe in telling a new and interesting Cinderella story. You could have saved yourself a lot more trouble and just made a Tumblr post instead of making a big movie, because that's essentially what you did. It's basically just one big Tumblr post. But anyways, the point is Elphaba was kind of a loner because a lot of people kind of decided to stay clear of her, as shown in the song "What Is This Feeling?" You know, she's a terror. Telling her that she's a terror and all sorts of nasty things, and everyone immediately joining Galinda's side without even trying to get to know Elphaba, simply because Galinda's the most popular and she doesn't like Elphaba because she's unusual and peculiar and quite impossible to describe. And I kind of get that it's supposed to be even, since Elphaba judges Galinda solely for being blonde, but again, sort of the point of the musical is that that's sort of in Galinda's younger years, when she was a little bit of a snob and a little bit of a stuck-up socialite who really only cared about herself. But I mean, slowly, she kind of starts to gravitate more toward Elphaba, and I may or may not have had my share of Galindas, though I guess in this case it's, I don't know, I guess this next point could apply to either Glinda or this situation could apply to either Elphaba or Nessa, because Glinda started to hang out with Elphaba more so because she kind of saw her as an opportunity to make her new project, to kind of, I guess in Fiero's words, Galindify her, to make her more glamorous and popular. You're gonna be popular. Sorry, I couldn't resist. So she basically treated her more like a mannequin or a doll or a plaything rather than an actual human being, just something that she could play with and dress up. Mostly just because she kind of felt sorry for her and because she could use her for her own purposes. Which, again, you could also say that applies to Nessa, considering that everyone really only wanted to hang out with her because she was in a wheelchair. And she even kind of calls Bach out for that in Dancing Through Life, where Bach is about to confess why he really asked her to dance, and she's like, "Oh, Bach, I know. It's because I'm in this chair and you felt sorry for me." Which, yeah, we all know that's why he did it. Well, that and the fact that she's technically his consolation prize because he originally wanted Galinda, but she turned him down. But what I'm trying to get at is I've had quite a few friendships, and now that I'm older, I kind of have to think them through and wonder how many of those friendships were legit and how many of those were more of a result of people just feeling sorry for me and taking pity on me because they thought I was a loner and a loser, and because they didn't want me to be alone, and because they were trying to be good Christians and invite me to hang out with them. And stuff like that. You know, when I was younger, if that was the case, I didn't have a problem with it because I just thought, well, they like me. Any attention is good attention. But now that I've gotten older and a little more cynical, I kind of have to wonder how many of those were really legit and how many of those were them just pitying me. Because, I mean, I've had people tell me that I'm likable, and if people willingly hung out with me, then they probably did actually like me for who I was. But again, because of my autistic social blindness, I'm kind of forced to overthink and question absolutely everything. So, with all of this negativity that I'm bringing up, I want to throw in something positive because it's not just all the bad things that I relate to Elphaba on, because there are quite a few good things too, like the fact that Elphaba has a very strong will and a very strong determination and aspiration toward her own beliefs and her own cause, as stated previously. And in the case of the musical, and this is something I probably should have brought up earlier, is the fact that this is all based on the musical. I haven't read the original book, and quite frankly, I don't want to, because I hear that A, it's really dark, and B, some parts of it border on porn, and the thought of that makes me extremely uncomfortable. So, anyways, moving on. Elphaba has her own cause that she's very invested in, which is animal rights. And I have my own cause, which in this case is autism acceptance, as seen by some of my previous videos of me talking about my own experiences with autism. And I've also talked about the importance of people paying more attention to autism in girls and women, since we tend to be overlooked, since we often don't present in the same way as boys, and the fact that a lot of autistic traits are typically associated with boys because they can be seen as normal behaviors in girls. And then there's also the fact that the doctor who first coined the term autism used only male patients in his research. So anyways, what I'm getting at is that Elphaba has a strong cause and I have a strong cause, which is autism. And thankfully, I've actually been able to find some resources outside of the internet to actually voice some of my opinions and talk about this subject of importance to me. You may have seen one of them, which is when I was giving my keynote speech at the Nebraska Transition College fundraising event. But I've also given 2 different presentations. Okay, well, not different. They're the same presentation, but 2 slightly different versions of the same presentation at my old college to one of the nursing classes, which is about how medical professionals can better accommodate for the individual needs of autistic women during pregnancy and labor, and how autistic women can better communicate their needs and their challenges with medical professionals. So that's been a really great opportunity for me, and it really and that's kind of what makes Wicked all the more special to me, because you have a young woman who is set on something that's super important to her and who doesn't let anybody stop her, even if it means that the world is against, well, not the world, even if it means just about everybody else is against her. Yet she doesn't back down, and that's something that a lot of young girls need. And some people may say it doesn't exactly count because eventually she has that relationship with Fiyero, but again, that's kind of another thing that ties into me, is some people say in order to be a strong woman, you can't fall in love, you don't need a man, you need to be independent and all that. And if you're a woman and you're not interested in romance, that's perfectly fine. But me, I don't know, I'm kind of figuring that out. I don't know if it's the fact that I am interested in romance or if it's the fact that I just want general companionship, but I like the idea of marriage and even starting a family, because I like the idea of spending my life with someone that I really care about. And I'm going to be honest, I really want someone who will take care of me. someone who will support me and stay by my side, somebody that I can depend on, someone who will be a companion to me without necessarily having to be a babysitter or a caregiver, because that's something that really scares me, is the thought of being a burden to somebody. And I have a feeling that's probably something that Elphaba had to grow up dealing with, considering her mother ended up dying, giving birth to her sister Nessa, because her father made Elphaba's mother take these plants. I have no idea what they were called. It's been forever since I've seen the musical, but she took like this remedy that was supposed to, because he couldn't stand the thought of having another green child, and that resulted in Nessa being born without the ability to use her legs, and it also resulted in the death of Elphaba's mother. And I mean, I've heard that this is a stark difference from the book, but at least in the musical, Elphaba grew up with a father who resented her and who most likely blamed her for her mother's death. So that's probably something that Elphaba had to carry with her, where she had to deal with the thought of the fact that she was a burden to her mother and her father, the fact that she caused her mother's death, and that the only thing she was good for was looking after her sister Nessa. And on the subject of Nessa, that's kind of another way that I found myself relating to Elphaba. Is there's sort of a, not necessarily a rivalry, but there is definitely a thing where Nessa is definitely getting much more attention and much more popularity and much more praise from not only their father, but also from the other kids at school. And as I stated in my book review of Her Story, Her Strength, 50 God Empowered Women of the Bible, when I was talking about Rachel and Leah, I've kind of had my own complicated relationship with my sister, where she was the younger and prettier one, and I envied her in a lot of ways, where I thought if I was skinny like her, if I had her pretty red hair, if I was as smart as her, if I was as good with socializing as her, then maybe people would like me more. Maybe I would have more friends. Maybe life wouldn't be quite as hard for me. But again, like with Rachel and Leah, we see that Nessa doesn't exactly have it easy either. I mean, yeah, she definitely has some issues that I'm definitely not going to defend, and I'm not trying to say in any way that this excuses what she did without giving away anything for those who haven't seen the musical. But what I am saying is I can also kind of relate to her and see her side of things, where, like I mentioned earlier, people only see the fact that she's in a wheelchair and they immediately take pity on her. So she hasn't had any legitimate relationships. And then there's the fact that her father adored her so much that she kind of had what a lot of people call golden child syndrome, where she was so smothered and sheltered that when he died, she felt so lost and alone, and she didn't know what to do. So all she had was Bach, and she kind of became codependent on him, and she ended up being stuck with him. And eventually she had to learn that he didn't really love her for who she was. He just hung out with her and ultimately, I guess, got involved in her life just because he pitied her and because he couldn't have Galinda. So she was technically his consolation prize, and I guess also because he kind of became codependent on her. So, yeah, that brings me to the end of, that pretty much sums it up, exactly what the musical Wicked really means to me. And I gotta say, even with all of the other musicals that have come along, Wicked has still remained my favorite. And I remember BuzzFeed made a video, kind of a song about musical nerds, and one of the lyrics was, when people say Wicked is their favorite musical, you laugh at how little they know. And that's really not fair, because one, it's sort of that old tactic that we know as gatekeeping, basically saying if you don't meet this exact criteria, then you're not a true fan. even though fandoms are supposed to be a place where we get away from the judgments of other people for making fun of the things that we are interested in. And then there's also the fact that I don't just like Wicked because it's popular, or just because of the music, or just because it's associated with The Wizard of Oz. I like it because it's a story about two women who are seemingly very different from each other, but they still end up being friends and find a way to support each other, even if they don't always agree with what the other one does. And then there's also the fact that the lead woman is a strong independent person who's not afraid to stand up for what she believes in, and she's not willing to sacrifice her morals solely for the sake of being more popular or for being more liked. So yeah, that is what autism means to me, both as a woman and as a neurodivergent individual. So I hope you've all had a fantastic Autism Acceptance Month. And if you have any other topics that you would like me to discuss, then feel free to leave it down in the comments. And I will bring you my Sims 4 Let's Play next.